Hello everyone, and welcome to the Insights webinar on diversity and inclusion. My name's Helen Stadinsky and I'm a Client Development Manager here at Insights. And today I'm also joined by David Eccleston, a Learning and Talent Manager expert and Insights licensed practitioner. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Helen. Hello everyone.
One of the things we were thinking about when putting this webinar together was that David and I have quite a few conversations around diversity and inclusion and a lot of other topics around people development. And it's great to have a thinking partner to have conversations about different ideas that we have, thoughts that are coming out of conversations with clients. And we find it really valuable to talk about these things and get sparks of inspiration from each other. So we hope today, listening in on our conversation, that we can also give you a spark of inspiration for your organisation. And we also hope that you'll get in touch with us to discuss things in more detail if you think your organisation would benefit from a stronger focus on diversity and inclusion. So I thought it might be a good start to look at what is diversity and inclusion. David, I thought it might be interesting to get a bit of insight into your perspective and how you see diversity and inclusion.
Indeed, yes. In my view, diversity is about the variation and variety of difference within a group of people, and quite often those groups of people in the workplace are referred to as teams. So it's about the mix and the range of difference within that team of people, and those differences can manifest themselves positively or negatively. Whereas if we look at inclusion, then to me that's more about a feeling that the individual has. It's the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being treated equally within that group of people, perhaps the feeling of equal opportunities within that group as well. And the inclusion piece talks about being fully ourselves while at the same time allowing others to be fully themselves. It's about collaborating effectively, being fully engaged, fully part of the team or group, while at the same time remaining an individual and being authentic.
That's really useful, David. And whenever we have these conversations and stop to think about what these things really mean, for me, it always gets you to think about, what do we do with this information and how does that enable us? So it's really useful to get those definitions from you.
Yeah, and building on that, Helen, what I found useful in the past to bring that into everyday usage is using a model created by Gardner, Schwartz and Rowe, which looks at the levels of cognitive diversity. So in this model, there are 3 levels. You have the primary, the secondary, and the organisational levels. At the primary level, it deals really with the legal requirements, factors such as age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical and mental ability, race and gender. I think when you talk to different business leaders, they've all got a level of understanding about those primary factors. Moving to the secondary level, it introduces factors such as social status, nationality, location, educational background. So delving deeper into what are those differences within the individual, within the teams or organisation. Then the third level is at the organisational level, where it introduces factors such as function, the division, location, career motivation, the level at which somebody operates within that business. Once we're talking at the organisational level, then it's very easy to move the conversation around, talking about what would interaction look like within the business? How does communication happen? What do we focus on in terms of task versus relationship? We can also look at things like problem solving, so how information gets processed, how we give explanations within this business. And about decision making, so how much an individual might like control and how we organise power within the organisation. Once the conversation has moved to that organisational level, then it's very straightforward to talk about behavioural diversity using the data that has been gained from Insights Discovery, and really have a broad conversation with business leaders in the context of the challenge they face. So talking about behavioural diversity, if this is what we can impact, and I think we both agree that it is, what are some of the critical success factors, Helen, that we're passionate about when we talk about behavioural diversity?
So one of the ways we try to illustrate this is with the 5-level model, which helps demonstrate the way in which we use Insights Discovery. So we start to work around the outer part of the model that you've just been talking us through. And again, to really leverage the differences, you need to move through these different levels. And at each stage, I think we get another level of sophistication for enabling the organisation and using diversity and inclusion to really help the organisation to get full benefit. So we always start right at the beginning with awareness. People familiar with our work will recognise that. And I think it's really critical that individuals in organisations are really able to operate to their power and what they can bring. There's so much gained in allowing and helping people to understand themselves well and get an awareness of what they're capable of and what they could bring before we get to any other factors of the culture, how the leaders lead, what we're doing as a team and so forth. That all really playing into that. So that's the first level, where people can properly get into this space and understand what they can bring to the organisation. There's a great quote I like to refer to, which is very straightforward. If we don't accept ourselves for who we are and where we've come from, who will? I think we all need to take ownership for that as individuals. However, there's also the next layer where we think about understanding and being understood. As individuals, we crave or really need that, I think. And it doesn't matter what level you are in the organisation, getting that understanding is fundamental. So understanding yourself, then starting to see why other people see things differently, why they do the things that they do, and why sometimes that works for us, and other times it can be difficult to make sense of. But those are the things that when we look at diversity and getting to the richness of that, then this is the key. Because those differences provide us with the potential and the richness. So moving then to the next level, which is where we think about how we adapt and connect. So to a certain extent, to get full value from its people, the organisation actually needs to help people to understand each other, but also then to take action from that. So it's what do we do differently? What do we do to learn in that? So this comes to adapting and connecting, moving on from I don't quite understand where someone's coming from to how you can then connect with them and make those interactions work better. So when we understand each other's personality type, that can really help us to engage more successfully and to see each other as adding value rather than being a frustration. For me, over the years, people can intellectually see that this makes sense, but to adapt your behaviour, to get better engagement and interaction with other people. But where this shifts to another level is where we can start to think about how we value people. So often those differences are there. It's when you can see past those differences, so in a sense moving from frustration to fascination, that's when we really start to get somewhere. So it's about understanding that truly valuing somebody, even though you sometimes don't quite understand how it is or why it is that they do the things that they do, that's when we start to get real, including and enabling people to then bring their best. So this then moves us up to the potential of that fifth level, which is leveraging the differences of diversity. And that organisational value that you talked about, David, looking at the I model, is where the organisation and the individual really start to come together and we can begin to capitalise on that.
I totally agree, Helen. And I think one of the purposes I'd like of this webinar is for people to think about the two models coming together in order to have a really rich conversation about diversity and inclusion in their organisation.
Absolutely. It's interesting to think about what the real tangible benefits are that this then links to. I think sometimes diversity and inclusion can be one of those things where people have in the past said, well, we just need to do it. But when you actually start to unpick it and look at it more closely, actually there is real potential here in enabling not just better collaboration and connections and using the talent that is in the organisation, but also the really exciting thing, I think, is that when you get individuals bringing their whole self to work, then we really do have the potential for getting innovation, new ideas and fresh ways of looking at things.
And having talked about differences, having spoken about our behavioural preferences and raising our level of awareness, as we've just been talking about, then the conversation can move on to what's the environment like in this organisation right now? What's the culture like? So if a person's behavioural preference is different to the average or the norm, for lack of a better term, within the business, how comfortable do they feel? What's daily life like in the organisation? Do they feel comfortable enough to challenge the way things are being done, the way things are being communicated? How are people being treated on a daily basis? Is it safe to put forward a different point of view because you think there's a better way of doing something, or you think there's an opportunity that is not being developed or taken advantage of? How open is the culture to people with those different outlooks on life to talk about who they are, how they see the world, and what it means to them? How will all that difference look when it's expressed within a team? Or is it a culture perhaps where you just keep quiet and you try to get along the best you can? You don't express those differences because you're not quite sure whether it's actually the safe thing to do. And of course, that moves into the whole other area of diversity and inclusion, which is creating that inclusive culture where people hope and feel that they can give all of themselves to work all of the time.
Yeah, so that's a great point that you make there, David, because I think environment and culture are so critical. If what we want is that diversity and that mix, and we want to include people, for me it starts to flag up some implications for organisations. So on one level, we recruit and spend time, effort and energy and resources to bring those people into the organisation. But if we're not careful, the culture, or being able to bring themselves into that culture, could mean for us that we lose good people. Or even that we've started on a plan to make the future look very different. But if we're not careful to recognise our high potentials and the other things we've talked about, they perhaps don't contribute fully, or even losing them out of the equation because we haven't considered how to enable them and put support mechanisms in place. As an example, there was a sales organisation that we worked with where they were really interested to look at where their high performers were and to get a sense of what that mix of people was. The senior sales leaders had quite a particular mix of colour energies, shall we say, and their anticipation or expectation was that their top performers, we were looking at pulling out the top 40 from a cross-section of 1,000 people, and their expectation was that this group would be quite like them. So it was quite a shock and a real mirror held up when actually what we discovered was that the 40 were from all around the wheel. We had a whole mix of different people, and I think it kind of makes sense to have that because really in sales, good people, good consultants can really work with lots of different types of people. They can adapt, they can connect, they're really quite self-aware. So what was really interesting about the mirror that was held up was that it really got the leaders thinking about some of the ways that they motivated and provided the environment and culture for these guys. Because actually half the people in that top 40 that they obviously really valued, the environment was geared towards a very different personality style. So then when we actually looked at their attrition rates and losing of people, it came as no surprise that there was a real correlation between the personality types that the environment didn't suit, leaving the organisation or not staying there very long. So it was a really good lesson to how we made it a much more inclusive environment for all to be able to flourish and to be able to continue to bring their good results and good work. And for me, that's a really powerful reminder of the fact that if our culture and our environment don't enable those individuals to bring their best, potentially we might lose that talent. I think it's quite interesting in the current environment where we are starting to pick up. And if we've got good talent in our organisation, there's no guarantee that they will stay and that we keep having access to that. So all of these things are very critical levers to enable us to keep our people engaged and there for us to get value from, and for them to be a part of creating the future that you talked about earlier.
Very much so. In my view, I think it can be tempting, particularly with the economic environment is tough and leaders are being asked to get more with less. But if you start a conversation with them around diversity and inclusion, they hear the diversity word and they start thinking about difference. They know that perhaps they want to be more innovative or they want to move into a new marketplace. Whatever that change looks like, the temptation for the leader is to say, well, go find me that person that is different. I'll have one of those, whatever that difference looks like. But they don't think about what life is going to be like when that person with the different talent or skill set joins the organisation. Will they fit in, for example? Will they be welcomed? Are they going to be comfortable and feel that they can be themselves? So for me, the conversation becomes more about, yes, we recognise that we need a different set of people that look at the world differently. However, if you don't think about the environment in which they've joined, that person will either come in for a short while and leave, and perhaps take a very bad impression of your organisation away with them, or possibly they'll join, see the way that they talk about the world and behave is not what it is accepted and rewarded in the organisation, and they'll try to fit in, which means they're not being authentic and are perhaps not giving of their best. And if they stay, it can become a difficult relationship on both sides. So it really is about recognising the difference that you want, then building or enhancing that inclusive environment so that the people coming in who do look at the world differently can be themselves all of the time. And I know we keep coming back to that point, but I think it's really critical in order that your organisation is seen as one that has an inclusive environment so that talent is attracted. And once you've attracted that talent, the innovation they deliver can then help you achieve your business goals.
Yes, that's a subject very close to my heart, David. I think you make that point really well. It is so critical. And I think the other part to that is around where we have talent in our organisation, but maybe we haven't tapped into it as well in the past as we could do. For all of us, I guess it's great to look forward and bring new talent in. It's more exciting. We might want to really use those new gifts that we've brought into the organisation. But I think it's also good to look within and to make sure that we're not missing some tricks, that there isn't talent sitting right under our nose that we haven't engaged or haven't nurtured.
For me, Helen, diversity and inclusion is fundamental for organisations to be successful. Because without having people who look at the world in a different way, organisations will just stagnate. Without someone there to challenge the status quo, why would people try to do things differently?
I agree, and I think that's probably a really great place to draw to a conclusion, because we could continue to have a conversation on this topic forever, I think. Always when we get together, we have such good exchanges, and I really value the dialogue that we have. I always learn lots, and I think that's also for me a really critical part of diversity. We're being open to what other people bring and learning constantly from that. I think it's also a really key part of that. So David, thank you so much for your time today and us having this conversation. And also thank you for those people listening to the webinar today. I think from mine and David's point of view, we really just hit the tip of the iceberg around this topic. And we really invite you to get in touch with us to continue the conversation. Pose your questions and share your knowledge and experience with us on Facebook, Google+, Twitter and LinkedIn pages. And you can find more information about D&I on our website at www.insights.com/diversity. Thank you very much for listening to us, and it's goodbye from me.
I've also enjoyed our conversation today, Helen. Thanks. And goodbye from me.